Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Deep Penetration Podcast. If this is your first time here, listening, watching, whatever it is that you're doing, welcome. In case you don't know who I am, my name is Danny, and I am a self-esteem and love coach, and I work specifically with the LGBTQ plus community, but this is an all-inclusive podcast. So, and even if you are not part of the community, I'm sure there's somebody that you know in your life that is. So again, I've said this many, many times, but just for general understanding, just in case this is your first time joining, the reason for why it's called Deep Penetration is one, because puns are funny. And number two is because I like to get to the root of issues. You know, I'm somebody who really likes to understand the mechanics of things and is trying to understand or unpack why things operate the way that they do, why things are the way that they are. So, what is the topic for today's episode? And it is coming out to friends and family. And, you know, I actually really struggled with making this episode because number one, I feel like this is a very subjective experience, right? So approaching this objectively just wouldn't really work, particularly for this situation. And the other part of this is because, you know, who am I to tell you how you should come out to your friends and family? It's not my place. But what I did want to do is provide some support and provide some insights and some personal experience when it comes to this process. So coming out is one of the most terrifying but also freeing experiences for anybody who has gone through it. And maybe you haven't gone through it yet. And if you haven't, that's totally okay. It's on your time and when you feel comfortable and when you feel it is the right time to do so. So often I hear people, particularly within the community, who will say like, oh, just come out, it'll be fine. And the truth is, sometimes it is and sometimes it's not. It depends on your situation. It depends on your upbringing. It depends on where you're raised. It depends on your culture. It depends on your religion. It depends on your familial situation. You know, there's so many different factors that play into the process of coming out that it is much more of a complex situation than just giving it a general like, oh, this is what you should do. But that being said, if you decide to finally come out to your friends and family, if there's any suggestions that I can give, any recommendations that I can give, the first people that you do it with should be people that you are comfortable with, that you trust. And honestly, most of the time, if they truly are close to you and they are your friends and there's a deep connection there, they're already going to know. There will be some kind of understanding or knowing. You know, when I still remember to this day, the very first person that I came out to, this was back in high school, was my best friend's at the time sister. And we were sitting out on the balcony at their place. And we were having a conversation and the topic of sexuality came up. And I remember just this rush of anxiety and adrenaline and emotion. And I just remember, you know, looking at her and telling her, I'm bisexual. And I was waiting for the fury of questions and, you know, the criticism or the opinions or whatever. And she just looked at me and she said, that's great. So am I. And in that moment, I was like, holy shit, there's somebody else who relates to my situation. So I'm not alone in this experience. And the reason for why it was so difficult for me to be able to say that was because number one, I was bullied all through elementary school. When it came to just me being who I was, I had a tendency of having more female friends than I did male friends. I wasn't super into sports back then. I was a little bit more, I guess I would say introverted, but not really because I like to joke around and do all of those things, but I only joked around with people that I was comfortable with. And as you know, in middle school and elementary school, if you are a boy who has a majority of female friends, then you're automatically looked at as, gay or faggot or whatever the terms that were used and are still used today. So at the time, I didn't really understand what that meant. I just knew that it was being used in a very negative way, in a derogatory way. So that term took on a very negative connotation for me. So when I got older and I started to understand the concept of sexual fluidity and orientation and identity and all these types of things, whenever I would look at the term gay, I had a very negative experience with that because of my childhood and the experience that I had growing up. And to be honest with you, I just really couldn't identify it not just because of the fact that, I had that negative experience, but I always found myself to be attracted to women as well. And, even as an adult, I still get criticism and opinions and all those things about being bisexual. So, it's almost like this ongoing coming out process that you experience. But needless to say, I just didn't feel like I could relate to the gay part of it. So I started to do my research and look at all the other, the different sexual orientations and how people identify. And, back then, I say that like I'm a dinosaur, but back then there weren't as many terms. And there weren't as many identifications, right, within sexuality and all of those things. So because I knew that I was attracted to women and because I also knew that I was attracted to men, what made the most sense to me was bisexuality. And even to this day, I still identify as bisexual because that's what feels true to me. And I'm very adamant about that, and I'm very self-confident with myself, and I know that that's who I am as a person, even if I met with questions and backlash and opinions and criticisms. At the end of the day, that's the world. That's how it works. And I just do my best to try to educate and, teach people about bisexuality when that question comes up. So all of that to say, because I had such a negative experience as a child, when I finally had the courage to tell somebody, I was expecting that same experience to come back around, the being made fun of, the degradation that comes with it, the breaking down. And that's not what I got. I actually got support from that person. So that inspired me and influenced me to tell the next person who was incredibly important to me. And that was my grandmother. And, growing up in a Latino household, it's not as acceptable to be somebody who identifies as queer. And again, I remember having that fear of telling her because I was afraid of what she would think, and she is to this day one of the most influential, important people in my life. And she just said that she didn't care and that she accepted me for who I was and that she loved me. And so, that was kind of like a snowball effect. So after that, I told my best friends, I told my mom, I told my sister, but the one person that I always struggled to tell was my dad. And that's because my dad was very conservative in his ways of thinking. It's what we call machismo in the Latin community, where he had a very specific kind of perception of individuals who identified as queer. I had a cousin who came out very early on in my life, and he was not met with the most support from our family. So, of course, that also terrified me, particularly from my dad's side of the family. So I was always afraid to tell my dad. And because I was always afraid to tell my dad, I always struggled to be very close to him, right? So the people that I was able to tell and felt comfortable telling, I became very close to and developed a very deep connection with. But I always struggled to have that with my dad. And actually, I recently told my dad about it, literally this past year. And I'm 35 years old. So I say all of that because I want you to understand that the coming out process doesn't have to be all at once. It doesn't have to be like you either tell everybody or you don't. It is on your time, and it is based on who you feel most comfortable letting in. Um, there's something that Karamo said on Queer Eye. If you don't know who Karamo is, please, please, please go check out Queer Eye on Netflix. And he said something that was so inspiring to me. And he said, I don't like to call it, and I'm paraphrasing here because I don't exactly remember what he said, but he said, I don't like to call it coming out. I like to call it welcoming in. You are welcoming in people to your life and allowing people to partake in the beauty that is you, right? Who you are as a person. And if somebody is unwilling to accept that invitation, that's their problem, not yours. If you haven't also, please go watch Karamo's new show. I love it. It's fantastic. I would love to have Karamo on the podcast one day. That would be a dream. But I think it's just very beneficial to have people who are part of the community out there as leaders, influencing, educating, and teaching everyone the queer experience. So again, I say all of that because even as a self-esteem and a love coach, I just told my dad this year about it. And a big part of that was influenced by the fact that I have a partner and somebody that I'm committed to. And, I just felt like the time was right. And, somebody said something to me at the beginning of this year where essentially what they said to me was, maybe it's not necessarily that your dad wouldn't accept you. It's that you're not giving him the opportunity to accept you. And that really kind of hit home for me because I came to realize that I was the one that was blocking that possibility, and it wasn't my dad. I wasn't giving him the benefit of the doubt. I wasn't allowing him to really be able to accept me because I wasn't willing to accept what he had to say, whether it was good or bad. So there is a part of this that also has to do with our own individual fears and defense mechanisms and these stories that we create in our head of what could potentially happen if we come out. And there also is the real threat of violence. That is something that we deal with within the community, the fear of the backlash and the getting hurt and the violence and all those types of things. That is very real. I think in any marginalized community, that's something that is at the forefront of our mind. I know for me, one of my mom's biggest fears when I came out and embraced who I was the fear of me not being accepted by society and, me getting hurt or being beat up or even worse yet, being killed, and my heart goes out to families who have experienced that. But that's not I don't want to say that's the norm. It's not the norm, but it doesn't account for the higher percentage of the coming out experiences, right? So really being able to manage and navigate the narrative that you create in your mind prior to coming out, which is completely understandable because it's all based on fear and anxiety and all those things. And in order to navigate that and manage that, telling people who you are very close to first, people that are open and understanding and have the ability to be a little bit more objective, and just being accepted by those people will influence you and inspire you to continue on your journey. But also keep in mind, it is your journey and nobody else's. So whoever you invite to go on that journey with you is your choice. It's on nobody else's time. So if you ever feel pressured or if you ever feel that other people are trying to convince you that you should come out for your own good, it's okay to acknowledge their experience as well and their concern and where they're coming from. But knowing and being strong in the decision that you are making for yourself because you know that it is on your time. And when you finally welcome people in, knowing that that was your choice and therefore you are in control. So, for anybody out there who has not come out yet, or is in the process of coming out, or has come out, um, I see you. I understand you. Um, for many of us, it has been a very difficult process. And for many of us, it's been a great process, a very accepting process, right? But either way, we all share that thread of experience in the canvas that is queer life. Um, and if you pull back, it's a beautiful canvas, and you are important. You deserve to be you and you deserve to belong. So, if for any reason you feel like you need support, if for any reason you feel like you are struggling, if for any reason that you feel like there are things that you need to work on prior to feeling comfortable enough to come out, I will provide some resources for you in the details below. I also coach people through this process as well. So if you feel like you need help with that, I am more than happy to help you with that. Please leave a comment, share your experience if you are comfortable. I want this to be a very open platform of communication and exchange and all of those things. I hope that you found this episode helpful. I hope that you found it resourceful. And if you enjoyed the episode, please make sure you're subscribing to the podcast. It helps the podcast, it helps the channel, and I greatly appreciate it. I hope you guys are having an amazing day, and I will see you on the next episode.